say maybe about 5 to 10 minutes for questions. First from the committee itself. So, members of the committee? All right, so go to the mic. Committee members, go to the mic.
Hi, I'm Jose Moron, Washington University in St. Louis. You mentioned that that you were told in medical school that it was like people taking opiates for the pain for the pain treatment, they are not getting addicted, but you are saying that there's a number like 10%. This is for addiction. What about if we talk about misuse or abuse that can lead to overdose? Is that the same number, or it depends on the terminology we use? We can see different numbers.
No, very good point. It depends on the terminology we use. So, for example, if you look at the surveys that have looked at the number of people that are misusing or diverting their opioids, you can have numbers up to 35 to 40%. And because, I mean, again, the lack of understanding, many of them describe them as addiction, when in fact it's not addiction. It's just basically they are diverting and using it, misusing it. And so that's why you get up with very, very high numbers by some of these surveys.
Aaron Kesselheim from the committee also. So I was interested in, you mentioned something about a partnership that NIDA created with the manufacturer of Narcan to develop the intranasal version. How was that partnership organized? Did you recruit them? Did you give them grants? Were there any kind of agreements in sort of the development process? What were the details of that?
Well, we started, I mean, NIDA did all of the background work on naloxone. And then we developed a mechanism. First of all, we identified a priority to actually optimize user-friendly delivery systems for naloxone. So we come up with a request for proposals. And we've created mechanisms that specifically target for a partnership between an academician and a pharmaceutical industry to bring a product into fruition. And this is what happened with these two companies. One of them succeeded or not. So we gave them a grant to be able to do this. And we work with them also in terms of helping them through the hurdles and facilitating the negotiations with the FDA where the scientific expertise from NIDA could be helpful. And that's the way, it's not unique to it, that's the way we try to partner with pharmaceuticals, because overall pharmaceuticals are not very interested on investing on medications for substance use disorders. So we have a long history of generating this type of mechanism of grant and partnership.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm also in the committee, AnneMarie Mackenzie Brown. And my question is with regard to the reason for the rapid rise of heroin use. You stated that there are two differing theories as to why that is, and that you felt that it was not because of the decreased access of opioids, but rather that people have developed substance use disorder because of prescription opioids and went to heroin. What is the data to support that? Well,
it's not two different hypotheses. It's the way that you narrate it. It's the way that you present it. Okay. So you can say, well, yes, it's becoming harder for them to get access to some of these medications. And for example, in some instances, the OxyContin now is much harder to actually extract from. So in the past, it would be easy to extract. So you can make the comment, that's why they are taking heroin. My way of narrating is these people are seeking heroin because they became addicted to their prescription opioid. And the reason why important is not just what are words, is the way that you interpret them. In one, you're saying you are doing a wrong thing by making it harder for patients to tamper with the drugs, if you say this is the reason why they are taking heroin, as opposed to putting the finger on where the problem is. You need to interfere with the diversion of prescription opioids. That's what I meant.
David Clarke from Stanford University, also a committee member. You showed in one of your first slides the very high prevalence of use of marijuana in the country. That's probably, I would estimate, going to increase with the ongoing legalization in many states, either medical or recreational. I wonder if you could comment further on the possible interactions of opioids with marijuana, either in terms of leading to frank overdose or perhaps abuse.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question, and of course from the pharmacological and then from the perspective of the consequences of these changes in policies to the population. Pharmacologically, actually, we're very interested on the possibility to which by combining cannabinoid agonists with opioids, you may be actually able to significantly decrease the dose of an opioid. So we're funding researchers to look into that because there's some preclinical data to suggest that's the case. From the perspective of how these changes in policies are influencing the partner, you probably have seen a couple of papers that have come up stating that in those states where marijuana is legal, the number of overdoses from prescription opioid is lower that in those states that it's not. However, if you look at the data, you'll find out, first of all, that the absolute numbers are not low. They are looking at the rate at which it's increasing is lower. But I don't want to I think that we have to look at data and keep our eyes on it, but I'm just saying it's not as simple as that. It is clear, and you could see why, in instances with all of the attention of opioids, a patient suffering from pain, and a physician may be more likely to say it's okay to prescribe marijuana. So it is the attention on the prescription opioid may facilitate the use of marijuana as an analgesic. Now, we have evidence that cannabinoids and 9-THC and actually also cannabidiol, which is at much lower content in marijuana, have analgesic effects. But on the other hand, we also have evidence that the analgesic effects to cannabinoids you become tolerant. So the concept, if you're putting someone on chronic marijuana, are you going to have to keep them constantly intoxicated? Or when they go through that withdrawal, will there be an hyperalgesia, which is something that happens with the opioids, and there is some evidence that may be happening with the cannabinoids. So we don't have sufficient knowledge in the whole area of cannabinoids and their potential involvement with analgesia, even though it's one of the most advanced as it relates to potential therapeutic effects. The data is still very limited. And there was a recent paper study that came out that were evaluating the potential of cannabis for the management of severe pain on patients with terminal cancer pain, and was negative. And again, which was disappointing, of course, because we want alternative medications, but also bears to mind under what conditions cannabinoids may be therapeutically beneficial or not, and under what conditions that combination that you say, can it increase the lethality of opioids? We have no evidence that I know of that it can. But sometimes lack of evidence doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Thank you, Mark Schumacher, UCSF, also a committee member. I wondered if you could approach the topic of resourcing the research funding directed toward developing new therapies for chronic pain. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're bringing it up because I think that this has to be highlighted as a gap area, identifying the urgent need for better analgesics that don't have the untoward effects of an opioid medication. Again, we need to incentivize pharmaceutical to get back into it. And us, obviously, promote these public-private partnerships that can help those companies by partnering with government-funded research to do it. So I think it is a fundamental issue that we need to do to address the current epidemic, but very importantly, for preventing it from happening in the future, because pain is not going to go away. And we need, and the number of people suffering from pain is so large. And when you have severe pain, it's something that needs to be addressed. There's an urgency on addressing it. So if we don't have it, of course we'll keep on relying on these opioid medications.
Thank you so much again for your comments. I'm Valerie Reynard, Cornell University, and a member of the committee. I'm wondering about another sort of arena of causal factors here that have to do with psychological effects. For example, in the Monitoring the Future study, which looks at how young people perceive the risk of different drugs, you can see that the risk perception of different populations tracks very nicely the use of drugs, for example, like marijuana and other drugs. So I noticed that you mentioned the brain and mechanisms of the brain, but what about the behavioral mechanisms that interact with that, the social and cultural mechanisms as well, that have to do with the perception of rewards and the perceptions of risks and the changes developmentally in adolescence?
Yeah, no, and that is a fundamental component on behavior, not just in adolescents, but all of us. We are actually very much influenced by our perception and expectation of what something is going to do. We're also very much influenced by normative behavior. And so if we feel that something is okay and we see our friends and colleagues doing it, we're much more likely to do it than not. And I think that this happened at the level of the healthcare system, where physicians were seeing other physicians prescribing opioids and feeling very comfortable. Absolutely, it does influence your perspective. When it comes to teenagers, what was very interesting is that we had, when I became NIDA director in 2003, I saw the numbers of 10% of kids reporting having used hydrocodone, 12 graders. I had never seen anything like that. And it rang my bell, and I said, guys, this is something, I mean, opioids are not used by teenagers. And so there was a very strong campaign, and that has actually been effective among teenagers of bringing down the abuse of prescription opioid medications significantly. We've halved it since 2003. The numbers on heroin have not gone up, and I was very worried, but it has been staying there, even though the new epidemiological data are showing higher numbers of teenagers dying from heroin. If you look at it in prevalence, it's not. So there is a recognition that these, among teenagers, these medications, even though they are medications, can be quite harmful. And that hopefully has led to preventing its escalation, and it's bringing it down. Of course, we're concerned about it as it relates to marijuana, because that's going in the opposite direction.
David Paul Teal, Yale University committee member. Thank you for your presentation and for your strong advocacy of science as an important part of addressing this issue. Our focus on the committee, of course, is most particularly on the FDA. And so I'm interested in knowing how regulatory structures of review, approval, monitoring can work hand in hand, not only in terms of the public and private partnerships that you've spoken of, but the public and public partnerships that might be useful in this regard.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's, the role of the FDA, of course, is more challenging at that level, because it's not just necessarily just based, I guess, on science as easily as us. They guide themselves on the science, but then they have to take into account multiple other factors. And in the area of development, for example, for us at the development of medications, we interact a lot with the FDA. And it's, what I can tell you, it's a difficult process to get medications approved for substance use disorders. And one of the big struggles that we have as it relates for us as an agency, but also in our partnerships with industry, is that the main outcome that the FDA is demanding in order to get approval for a medication for the treatment of a substance use disorder other than alcohol is full abstinence. And full abstinence is a bar that is gigantic. And my view has been, if I can decrease consumption of a drug by 75%, why do I have to throw out the drug? And so this is, I mean, and we've had this dialogue back and forth, and then it's thrown back at us, and I take the responsibility. We need to document that there is a benefit on decreasing the amount of drug, that there is a benefit for a medication to be able to decrease the amount of drug a person is taking. So that is, we need to now, it's been thrown back at us, show the FDA that there is a positive outcome on that. But that would be, this is a fundamental struggle that we have all along that has made it actually very difficult to move compounds forward.
Tracy Green from Boston University and Brown. Thank you very much, and a committee member. Thank you very much again for the advocacy around science and evidence-based medicine in our challenge here today. I do have a question about integrative medicine and the role of in the treatment of pain and in the treatment of substance use disorder, and in terms of the research areas, promises, and potentially the complementary and important treatments that might come from integrative medicine in this particular area.
Well, and as you know, and you've sort of heard a CDC presentation in terms of the recommendation or the guidelines, many of the guidelines are actually addressing the importance, the relevance of integrated care for the management of chronic pain, along with a multi-pronged approach. The issue is it's much more expensive if you look at it in terms of what are the costs right now. So it is very limited. And the same thing when it comes to substance use disorder. you get the best outcomes when you have an integrated care. And one in the areas of implementation science that we found specifically is to develop models of that integrated care that are sustainable. So we can come up with a pie in the sky that is just gorgeous, but it's so expensive that nobody really utilizes it. So that's part of the challenge in terms of what we're doing. What models can be done in a way that is going to sustain them in the current healthcare system.
Thank you so much.